There is a dangerous, intoxicating illusion that comes with a badge and a gun. It makes small men feel like gods. But what happens when a predator in uniform pulls over a man whose entire life has been forged in the fires of elite combat? Officer Garrett Shaw thought he had caught an easy target driving through his wealthy town. He didn't know the man behind the wheel was a decorated Army Ranger, and tonight, the hunter would become the hunted. The 1969 Chevrolet Chevelle SS rumbled along the blacktop of Highway 9. Its big block V8 purred with a deep, resonant growl that only came from thousands of hours of meticulous restoration. Behind the wheel sat Major Harlan Vale, a man who had spent the better part of his adult life navigating hostile territories that most people only saw on the evening news. Harlan had recently returned stateside after wrapping up another combat deployment as an Army Ranger. The transition from the adrenaline-soaked mountains of the Middle East to the quiet, tree-lined highways of North Carolina was always jarring. Out there, every shadow held a potential threat. Here, the greatest danger was supposed to be a deer darting across the asphalt. The Chevelle was his sanctuary. It had belonged to his late father, William, who had purchased it brand new before shipping off to Vietnam. When William passed years earlier, Harlan had poured his grief and his deployment savings into bringing the classic muscle car back to showroom perfection. The gleaming midnight blue paint caught the amber glow of the setting sun, and for the first time in months, Harlan felt his shoulders drop from their permanent tension-locked position. He was heading to Oak Ridge Creek, a wealthy, insular suburb known for its manicured estates, country clubs, and aggressively enforced borders. Harlan had no desire to be in Oak Ridge Creek, but he had a dinner engagement with his commanding officer, Colonel Thaddeus Riker, who had recently purchased a retirement home in the area. As Harlan crossed the town line, the speed limit abruptly dropped. Anticipating the infamous speed traps of Oak Ridge Creek, he had already downshifted, coasting smoothly well under the new limit. He drove with the precision of a man who left nothing to chance. His seatbelt was fastened. Both hands rested at 10 and 2 on the wooden steering wheel, and every light on the classic car was in perfect working order. He was wearing civilian clothes, a fitted gray thermal Henley and dark denim jeans. Without his uniform, the medals, and the combat patches, he looked like any other civilian. More specifically, to certain eyes, he looked like a large, muscular black man driving an expensive vintage car through a neighborhood where the median income sat comfortably in the top 1%. Harlan saw the cruiser, tucked behind the thick oak trees near the town welcome sign, before the officer even hit the ignition. His combat-trained eyes automatically tracked the silhouette of the patrol car. A beat later, the cruiser pulled out, its tires kicking up a small cloud of gravel, and aggressively fell in behind the Chevelle. Harlan didn't alter his speed. He kept his eyes on the road, glancing briefly in the rearview mirror. The patrol car tailgated him for a solid stretch, riding so close that Harlan couldn't even see its headlights in his mirrors. It was a classic intimidation tactic, designed to make a driver nervous, to force them to cross a double yellow line or tap the brakes too hard, giving the officer the paper-thin excuse needed for a traffic stop. Harlan didn't bite. His resting heart rate stayed low. Taking incoming fire in the Korengal Valley had been stressful. A tailgating local cop was barely a nuisance. Then the flashing red and blue lights erupted, cutting through the encroaching twilight. The short, angry burst of the police siren chirped, demanding submission. Harlan sighed, his broad chest rising and falling slowly. He knew exactly what this was. He activated his right turn signal, decelerated slowly, and bypassed a narrow, dark stretch of shoulder, in favor of pulling into the brightly lit parking lot of a closed gas station a short distance ahead. It was a standard safety protocol, beneficial for both the driver and the officer, ensuring visibility and reducing the risk of being struck by passing traffic. He parked the Chevelle neatly, turned off the engine, and removed the keys from the ignition, placing them visibly on the dashboard. He rolled down all 4 windows, turned on the interior dome light, and placed his large hands firmly back on the top of the steering wheel. He made himself entirely visible, removing any ambiguity, any shadow, and any excuse an officer might use to claim they feared for their life. And in the side mirror, Harlan watched the door of the patrol car swing open. Officer Garrett Shaw stepped out. He was a man in his 40s with a flushed complexion and a thick, heavy-set frame that strained the buttons of his tailored uniform. Shaw adjusted his duty belt, resting his right hand casually but deliberately on the butt of his sidearm as he approached the driver's side of the Chevelle. Harlan took a slow, deep breath, mentally preparing himself for the theater he was about to participate in. The heavy footsteps stopped just behind the B-pillar of the Chevelle. Officer Shaw didn't step fully into the window frame. He hung back in the driver's blind spot, forcing Harlan to turn his head awkwardly to make eye contact. It was another textbook power play. Shaw shone a high-lumen tactical flashlight directly into the rear-view mirror, bouncing the blinding beam straight into Harlan's eyes. "Evening, officer," Harlan said, his voice calm, deep, and devoid of any confrontational edge. Shaw didn't return the greeting. He stood in silence for several long seconds, scanning the pristine interior of the classic car, his eyes lingering on the leather bucket seats and the polished chrome shifter. "Whose car is this, boy?" Shaw finally asked. The last word was dropped with heavy, deliberate emphasis. It wasn't a casual slip of the tongue. It was a calculated insult, a verbal test of dominance. Harlan's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but his expression remained a mask of polite indifference. "It's my vehicle, officer. Is there a reason you pulled me over tonight?" "I asked the questions here," Shaw snapped, leaning down slightly so his face was visible in the window frame. "I asked whose car it is. A ride like this costs more than a house in some neighborhoods. You don't look like the type of guy who restores classic American steel." "I have the registration right here," Harlan replied, keeping his hands glued to the steering wheel. "My license, registration, and proof of insurance are in my wallet, in my right back pocket. Do I have your permission to retrieve them?" Shaw sneered, clearly annoyed by Harlan's procedural perfection. People who knew their rights and followed protocol were harder to break down. "Slowly, no sudden movements. I see a shadow I don't like, and we're going to have a serious problem." Harlan shifted his weight, slowly reached into his back pocket, and pulled out his leather wallet. With deliberate, telegraphed movements, he extracted his driver's license, the vehicle's registration, and his insurance card. As a secondary measure, he also pulled out his green active-duty military identification card and handed the stack through the window. Shaw snatched the cards out of Harlan's hand. He shined his light on the driver's license. "Harlan Vale, Fayetteville," Shaw read aloud, butchering the pronunciation with a lazy drawl. "You're a long way from home, Harlan. What brings you to Oak Ridge Creek? We don't get a lot of tourists like you out here." "I'm visiting a friend for dinner," Harlan said. Shaw shuffled the cards deliberately, ignoring the military ID. He looked at the registration. "Car is registered in your name, issued years ago. How'd you afford it? You steal it or deal for it?" Harlan's eyes locked onto Shaw's. The Ranger training kicked in, the psychological conditioning that allowed him to compartmentalize anger and focus purely on the objective. The objective here was to survive the encounter and expose the man standing outside his window. "It was an inheritance from my father," Harlan answered, his tone dropping an octave, becoming rigid and formal. "Again, officer, I need you to articulate the reason for this traffic stop. I was traveling under the posted speed limit. My vehicle is in complete mechanical compliance, and I maintain my lane." "You were swerving," Shaw lied effortlessly, stepping closer to the door. "Crossed the solid white line twice back there on Highway 9. That's failure to maintain a lane. Suspicion of driving under the influence." "I respectfully disagree with your assessment," Harlan said. He subtly glanced at Shaw's chest. The black square of the Axon body camera was pinned to the officer's uniform, but the small red indicator light, which should have been blinking to indicate it was recording, was dead. Shaw had intentionally powered it down before stepping out of his cruiser. Harlan reached up with his right hand and tapped the face of his smartwatch, discreetly activating the voice memo application. If there wasn't going to be police video, there was absolutely going to be an audio record. I don't care if you disagree, Shaw spat, leaning closer, practically putting his head inside the open window. I smell something coming from this vehicle. Smells like marijuana. Harlan mentally shook his head. It was the oldest, most abused loophole in law enforcement history. The fabricated scent of narcotics. An invisible, unprovable claim that granted an officer immediate probable cause to bypass the Fourth Amendment and tear a vehicle apart. Officer, there is no marijuana in this vehicle, Harlan stated clearly and loudly, ensuring his watch picked up every syllable. I do not smoke. I'm an active duty captain in the United States Army Rangers. I'm subjected to random urinalysis on a monthly basis. If you look at the military ID you are holding, you will see my rank and status. Shaw finally glanced at the green card. He scoffed and tossed it back through the window. It landed on Harlan's lap. Anyone can buy a fake plastic card at an Army surplus store down in Fayetteville, Shaw mocked. You expect me to believe a guy like you is a captain in the Rangers? Please. You probably washed out of basic training and kept the ID to try and get out of speeding tickets. Harlan didn't touch the ID on his lap. His hands went right back to the steering wheel. If you suspect my identification is forged, I invite you to run it through your dispatch terminal, or you can call the provost marshal at Fort Liberty to verify my identity. But I will state again for the record, there is no contraband in this car, and I have committed no traffic violations. Shaw's face darkened. The flush in his cheeks deepened into an angry crimson. He wasn't used to defiance, let alone calm, articulate, hyper-logical defiance. In Shaw's world, people cowered. They begged, they got angry, started yelling, and gave him the excuse he needed to escalate to physical violence. Harlan was offering him a brick wall of perfect compliance. Sit tight, Captain, Shaw said, dripping with sarcasm. Keep your hands where I can see them. I'm going to run your tags. If I find out this car is stolen, you're going out of here in bracelets. Shaw turned and walked back to his cruiser, his heavy boots crunching on the pavement. Left alone in the dim light of the gas station, Harlan finally let out a slow exhale. He looked at his watch. It was recording perfectly. He then reached up to the dashboard and tapped his dash cam. The camera was small, discreet, and pointed both out the windshield and inward into the cabin. It had been recording in high definition with full audio since he turned the key earlier that day. Shaw hadn't noticed it yet. Harlan knew this wasn't over. A cop like Shaw didn't back down. When their authority was challenged by someone they deemed inferior, they doubled down. Harlan prepared himself for the inevitable escalation. Time dragged by. The silence of the abandoned gas station was broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the Chevelle's cooling exhaust pipes and the low static of the police radio echoing from Shaw's cruiser. Harlan watched the rearview mirror. He could see Shaw sitting in the driver's seat, bathed in the harsh blue light of his mobile data terminal. Shaw was typing furiously, likely trying to find any outstanding warrant, any unpaid parking ticket, any excuse to justify what he was about to do. He would find nothing. Harlan's record wasn't just clean, it was spotless. Suddenly, a second set of headlights swept across the parking lot. Another Oak Ridge Creek patrol car pulled in swiftly, parking at an aggressive angle that blocked the Chevelle from moving forward. A young officer, Rookie Elias Rowe according to his silver nameplate, stepped out. He looked fresh out of the academy with an eager but nervous energy. Shaw exited his vehicle and intercepted Rowe near the rear bumper of the Chevelle. Harlan couldn't hear their exact words, but the body language was clear. Shaw was gesturing wildly toward Harlan's car, painting a picture. Rowe nodded along, looking apprehensively at the sleek muscle car. The two officers approached. Shaw took the lead, returning to the driver's side window, while Rowe flanked the passenger side, shining his own flashlight into the car. "All right, Vale," Shaw said, his voice dropping all pretense of a routine traffic stop. "Step out of the vehicle." "Officer," Harlan replied, his voice remaining terrifyingly steady. "I have provided my identification and my registration, which I assume came back clean. Am I receiving a citation or am I free to go?" "I said, step out of the damn car," Shaw barked, his hand unclasping the retention strap on his holster. The unmistakable sound of the leather snapping open echoed in the quiet night. It was a lethal threat. "I am asking for clarification," Harlan continued, turning his head to look directly into Shaw's eyes. "Are you ordering me out of the vehicle?" "Yes, I am ordering you out of the vehicle," Shaw shouted, his spit flying onto the Chevelle's window glass. "Under Pennsylvania versus Mims, I have the right to order you out, and I have probable cause to search this vehicle based on the odor of narcotics. Now get out before I shatter this window and drag you out." Harlan didn't flinch at the shouting. "I am complying with your lawful order to exit the vehicle," Harlan said loudly. "I am unbuckling my seatbelt with my right hand. My left hand remains on the wheel." Harlan moved with slow, deliberate precision. Click. The seatbelt retracted. "I am now reaching for the door handle with my left hand." Harlan pulled the latch and pushed the heavy steel door open. He swung his legs out and stood up. When Harlan Vale stood at full height, the physical dynamic of the encounter shifted violently. Tall and powerfully built, Harlan towered over the out-of-shape patrolman. The gray thermal shirt clung to his broad shoulders and thick chest. He looked exactly like what he was, a highly trained Tier 1 operator. Shaw involuntarily took a hurried step backward, his hand instantly wrapping around the grip of his pistol. His eyes widened slightly as he took in the sheer size of the man he had been bullying. On the other side of the car, Rookie Rowe unholstered his taser, his hands trembling slightly. "Face the car," Shaw commanded, his voice cracking just a fraction. "Put your hands on the roof. Spread your legs." Harlan turned smoothly, placing his palms flat against the cool metal of the Chevelle's roof. He spread his feet. "I am complying," he stated. "However, I state for the record that I do not consent to any search of my person or my vehicle." Shaw stepped forward and began the pat-down. It wasn't a standard safety frisk for weapons. It was meant to demean. Shaw kicked Harlan's ankles forcefully to widen his stance and ran his hands aggressively up Harlan's inner thighs, pushing the boundaries of a standard Terry frisk. Harlan felt the anger flare up in his chest, a hot, searing spike of pure rage. He closed his eyes and breathed through his nose. "Discipline," he told himself. "Let him dig the grave. Let him jump in." "He's clean," Shaw grunted, clearly disappointed not to find a weapon or contraband. "Rowe, keep an eye on him. If he twitches, tase him." Rowe moved to the front of the car, keeping his taser pointed at Harlan's center mass. "Don't move, man," Rowe said, his voice tight. Just stay still." "I'm not going anywhere, Officer Rowe," Harlan said calmly. "I suggest you activate your body camera. Officer Shaw's seems to be malfunctioning." Rowe looked confused, glancing at his senior partner's chest, then down at his own camera, ensuring the red light was blinking. Shaw ignored the exchange and dove into the Chevelle. He was brutal. He ripped the floor mats out, tossing them onto the greasy asphalt. He tore through the center console, dumping Harlan's registration papers, charging cables, and sunglasses onto the passenger seat. He jammed his flashlight under the seats, scraping the restored leather. Harlan watched over his shoulder. His jaw clenched so tightly his teeth ached. The disrespect for his father's memory was harder to stomach than the physical pat-down. "Well, well, well." Shaw's muffled voice echoed from inside the cabin. "What do we have here?" Shaw backed out of the passenger side door, holding a heavy black steel lockbox. It was roughly the size of a thick dictionary, secured with a biometric thumbprint scanner and a heavy-duty combination dial. "What is this, Vale?" Shaw demanded, walking around to the front of the car and slamming the metal box down hard onto the hood of the Chevelle. Harlan flinched at the sound of the metal scraping against his father's flawless paint job. "That is a secured private container," Harlan said coldly. "I know what it is," Shaw sneered. "It's a drug safe. Or maybe you've got an unregistered piece in here. Open it." "No," Harlan said. The word hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Shaw blinked, stunned by the flat refusal. "Excuse me." "I said no," Harlan repeated, turning his head to look Shaw dead in the eye. "You claimed you had probable cause to search the vehicle based on the fabricated scent of marijuana. Even if that lie held up in court, which it won't, that does not grant you the right to bypass a locked, secured container without a warrant. I do not consent to you opening that box." Shaw laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You think you're a lawyer now, boy? I don't need a warrant when I have reasonable suspicion that a felony is being committed. Now put your thumb on this scanner and open the damn box, or you are going to jail for obstruction of justice." "Officer Shaw," Harlan said, his voice dropping into a register that sent a chill down Rookie Rowe's spine. "I am going to give you one final opportunity to de-escalate this situation. You are stepping into territory that will end your career. I highly recommend you call your watch commander down here before you try to force that box open. You do not want to see what is inside." Shaw's face twisted into an ugly mask of pure arrogance. To him, Harlan's warning wasn't a lifeline. It was a challenge to his authority. "Rowe!" Shaw barked, his eyes never leaving Harlan's. "Go to the trunk of my cruiser. Get the breaching pry bar." Rowe hesitated. Sir, are you sure? We could just call it in. Get a warrant if we need." "I said get the damn bar, Rowe!" Shaw roared. "I'm not waiting on some judge while this thug stands here giving me orders. Move!" Rowe scrambled to the cruiser. Harlan looked at the steel box resting on the hood of his car. Inside that box wasn't drugs, and it wasn't an unregistered weapon. Inside that box was a collection of heavily classified briefing documents, highly sensitive cryptographic keys for military communications, and a personal signed letter from the Secretary of Defense regarding Major Vale's upcoming promotion and deployment strategy. And Shaw was about to pry it open in the parking lot of a gas station. Harlan looked back at Shaw, a cold, almost pitying look in his eyes. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and the jaws were about to snap shut. "You're making a massive mistake," Harlan whispered. "Shut up." Shaw smiled, taking the heavy iron pry bar from a trembling Rowe. "Let's see what you're hiding." The screech of tortured metal echoed across the empty asphalt. Officer Shaw jammed the heavy iron pry bar beneath the reinforced lid of the lockbox, using the pristine midnight blue hood of the 1969 Chevelle for leverage. Harlan closed his eyes for a fraction of a second as the iron gouged deep into his father's custom paint job, scraping down to the bare steel. It was a desecration. But the destruction of the car was nothing compared to the catastrophic legal boundary Shaw was currently obliterating. "Officer Rowe," Harlan said over his shoulder, his voice projecting clearly. "I want you to visually verify and note the time. Officer Shaw is forcibly bypassing a federally secured container." Rowe swallowed hard, his hand still shaking on the grip of his taser. He glanced at his smartwatch, a look of profound unease washing over his young face. Sir, maybe we should stop and call the shift supervisor." "Shut up, Rowe," Shaw grunted, his face red with exertion as he threw his entire body weight onto the pry bar. With a deafening crack, the heavy-duty hinges surrendered. The biometric lock sparked once, emitting a high-pitched 2-second digital whine before dying. The lid of the box flew open, clattering against the windshield. Shaw dropped the pry bar onto the damaged hood, a triumphant smirk plastered across his sweaty face. "Let's see the stash, Captain." He reached inside and pulled out the contents. There were no bags of white powder. There were no illegal firearms. There were only thick, heavy-stock manila folders, a solid-state cryptographic hard drive stamped with a red barcode, and a leather-bound portfolio. Shaw frowned, flipping open the first folder. The bold crimson lettering across the top and bottom of every single page screamed out in the dim light of the gas station. Top secret, //Chai, //NOFORN. Beneath the classification markings were detailed satellite topographies of a region in Eastern Europe, overlaid with Joint Special Operations Command troop movements, logistical supply chains, and highly sensitive intelligence reports, detailing foreign adversarial capabilities. "What the hell is this?" Shaw muttered, his thumb smudging a highly classified satellite photograph. "You're making fake spy documents to sell online. Is this some kind of LARP thing?" "Officer Shaw," Harlan stated, his voice ringing out with absolute icy authority. "You are holding classified intelligence documents belonging to the United States Department of Defense. You have just committed a Class A felony under the Espionage Act by forcibly bypassing a secured container and accessing sensitive compartmented information without clearance. Put the documents back." Shaw barked a laugh, though it sounded a little thinner, a little less confident. He tossed the first folder carelessly onto the windshield and opened the leather portfolio. Inside rested heavy cardstock stationery bearing the gold-embossed seal of the Department of Defense. Shaw read the signature at the bottom aloud. "Lloyd J. Austin III, Secretary of Defense." He looked up, a sneer twisting his lips. "You really went all out on the props, Vale. Forging a signature from the SECDF. You're going to federal prison for fraud." "Read the letter, Shaw," Harlan said, his eyes locking onto the older cop. Shaw's eyes scanned the page. The letter was a personal commendation and an authorization for Major Harlan Vale to retain custody of the cryptographic drive for transit to a secured JSOC briefing. It outlined in no uncertain terms the federal authority granted to Harlan during this transit. For a brief second, a flicker of doubt crossed Shaw's eyes, but his pride, swollen by years of unchecked authority in Oak Ridge Creek, violently pushed it away. He couldn't be wrong. He wouldn't be wrong. "Get your hands behind your back!" Shaw suddenly roared, unhooking the handcuffs from his belt. "You're under arrest for forgery, obstruction of justice, and suspected espionage. Rowe, cuff him." Harlan did not resist. He knew better. He slowly brought his hands behind his broad back, interlacing his fingers. Rowe stepped forward hesitantly, holstering his taser and pulling out his own cuffs. He ratcheted the cold steel around Harlan's thick wrists. The cuffs were tight, biting into his skin. "In the back of my cruiser," Shaw ordered, gathering the spilled classified documents in a messy, crumpled pile and shoving them back into the broken lockbox. "You're done, boy." As Rowe escorted him toward the squad car, Harlan glanced down at the shattered remains of the lockbox on his hood. What Shaw didn't know, what his localized small-town brain couldn't possibly comprehend, was that the high-pitched whine the box had emitted when broken wasn't just failure. It was a tamper-evident distress beacon, linked directly to the Department of Defense's global monitoring network. The signal had instantly alerted JSOC headquarters and the United States Army Criminal Investigation Division that top-secret materials were being violently compromised. GPS coordinates had been transmitted. A Tier 1 rapid response protocol had automatically been initiated. Harlan ducked his head and slid into the cramped hard plastic back seat of the police cruiser. The trap hadn't just snapped shut. The jaws had locked. Shaw was a dead man walking. The interior of the cruiser smelled of stale coffee and industrial disinfectant. Harlan sat in silence, the heavy steel of the handcuffs digging into his wrists. Outside, Shaw was strutting around the Chevelle, taking photos with his personal cell phone, completely ignorant of the digital tripwire he had just severed. Rowe slid into the driver's seat of the cruiser, shutting the door. He didn't look back at Harlan. The young rookie was staring at his laptop terminal, his face illuminated by the harsh blue light of the screen. He was running Harlan's name and the vehicle identification number through the National Crime Information Center database. Harlan watched in the reflection of the plexiglass divider as Rowe's eyes widened. The rookie's mouth fell open in a silent, "Oh." The screen hadn't just returned a clean record. It had returned a red-flagged restricted file, a marker indicating that the individual queried was an active-duty Tier 1 operative, accompanied by a glaring notification to contact the Department of Defense immediately upon detention. Rowe slowly turned around in his seat, looking through the metal grate at Harlan. The arrogance of the uniform had completely melted off the rookie's face, replaced by a pale, sick dread. "Sir," Rowe whispered, his voice trembling, Are you really JSOC?" "I am," Harlan replied calmly. "And your partner just forcefully accessed a Level 5 encrypted lockbox containing actionable, compartmentalized intelligence. He has contaminated the chain of custody and exposed top-secret documents to an unsecured environment." Rowe swallowed, a bead of sweat tracing down his temple. He thought it was drugs. He thought it was fake. "Ignorance of the law is not an excuse, Officer Rowe. You enforce that rule every day. Tonight it applies to you." Harlan leaned slightly forward, against the constraints. "Look out your windshield. Tell me what you see." Rowe turned his head. Far down Highway 9, cresting the hill that led out of Oak Ridge Creek, a procession of headlights was appearing. But they weren't moving at the standard speed limit. They were coming fast, eating up the blacktop with aggressive velocity. Suddenly, the police radio mounted on the dashboard erupted into chaotic static. Unit 4, this is dispatch. Come in immediately, over." The dispatcher's voice was panicked, a stark contrast to the usual bored monotone. Rowe grabbed the radio mic with a shaky hand. "This is Unit 4, Rowe speaking." "Unit 4, where is Shaw? We just received a Priority 1 override call from the FBI field office and the Provost Marshal. They are demanding your exact coordinates. What the hell is going on out there?" Before Rowe could respond, the wail of sirens pierced the night air. But these weren't the standard chirps of local law enforcement. It was the deep, guttural howl of heavy federal response vehicles. 4 massive, unmarked, matte black Chevrolet Suburbans swarmed into the gas station parking lot, their high-beam headlights washing the entire area in blinding white light. They moved with military precision, boxing in both Oak Ridge Creek patrol cars and Harlan's Chevelle in a tactical enclosure. Shaw, who had been leaning against Harlan's car, froze. He squinted against the glaring lights, his hand instinctively dropping to his sidearm. "Hey, this is an active crime scene. Back off," he shouted, completely misreading the situation. The doors of the Suburbans flew open simultaneously. More than a dozen heavily armed men stepped out. Some wore full tactical gear with FBI emblazoned in stark yellow letters across their plate carriers. Others wore the sleek, subdued multicam uniforms of military police, their rifles held securely at the low ready. "Hands away from your weapon," a thunderous voice echoed from a megaphone. "Step away from the vehicle now." Shaw's jaw dropped. The reality of the situation finally violently shattered his delusion. He slowly raised his hands, stepping away from the Chevelle, his eyes darting frantically between the heavily armed federal agents surrounding him. From the lead Suburban, a tall, imposing man in a pristine army dress uniform stepped out. It was Colonel Thaddeus Riker, the man Harlan had been driving to meet. Riker's face was carved from granite, his eyes blazing with a fury that could melt steel. He marched directly toward Shaw, flanked by 2 CID agents. "Who is the commanding officer of this scene?" Colonel Riker demanded, his voice slicing through the chaos like a whip. "I am," Shaw stammered, trying to puff out his chest, but failing miserably under the crushing weight of the colonel's glare. "Officer Garrett Shaw, Oak Ridge Creek PD. We have a suspect in custody for forgery and—" "Shut your mouth!" Colonel Riker snapped, stepping so close to Shaw that the officer had to lean back. "You don't have a suspect. You have a United States Army Ranger Major unlawfully detained. And if what my command center just told me is true, you have forcefully accessed a Department of Defense secured courier box." Riker's eyes flicked to the hood of the Chevelle. He saw the gouged paint, the shattered metal of the lockbox, and the highly classified manila folders scattered carelessly on the windshield. The color completely drained from Colonel Riker's face, replaced by a terrifying cold rage. He looked back at Shaw, who was now trembling visibly. "Agent Quill," Colonel Riker said, not breaking eye contact with the local cop. An FBI agent stepped forward. "Yes, Colonel." "Disarm this man," Riker ordered, pointing a finger directly at Shaw's chest. "Arrest him, read him his rights, and prep him for federal transport." Shaw gasped, taking a frantic step back. "Wait. No, you can't do this. I have jurisdiction here. He crossed the white line. I smelled marijuana." "You smelled nothing but your own ego," Riker said softly. "You have just compromised the Level 5 intelligence packet sanctioned by the Secretary of Defense. By tomorrow morning, you will be in a federal holding cell. By next month, you will be in Leavenworth." As the FBI agents moved in, stripping Shaw of his gun belt and slamming him against the side of his own cruiser, Rowe sat frozen in the driver's seat, watching his mentor's career end in spectacular fashion. Harlan sat quietly in the back, watching the flashing red and blue lights paint the parking lot. The storm he had warned Shaw about had arrived, and it was glorious. Inside the suffocating confines of the police cruiser, Rookie Rowe was hyperventilating. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white, his wide eyes fixed on the terrifying spectacle unfolding through the windshield. The federal agents moved with a synchronized, ruthless efficiency that local law enforcement could only dream of. A sharp, authoritative rap on the driver's side window made Rowe jump out of his skin. Colonel Riker stood outside, his face a mask of uncompromising military authority. Rowe scrambled to roll down the window, his fingers fumbling violently with the controls. "Yes, sir, Colonel—" "Unlock the doors, officer," Riker commanded, his voice cold enough to freeze water. "And get the cuffs off my major. Now." "Yes, sir, right away, sir." Rowe threw the cruiser into park, unlocked the rear doors, and practically fell out of the driver's seat in his haste to open the back door. His hands shook violently as he inserted the small universal key into the cuffs binding Harlan's wrists. The heavy steel ratchets clicked open. Harlan rolled his broad shoulders, bringing his hands forward and rubbing the deep red indentations left by the tight metal. He stepped out of the cruiser, towering over the trembling rookie. "Major Vale," Colonel Riker said, his rigid posture softening just a fraction as he extended a hand. "Are you injured?" "No, sir," Harlan replied, shaking his commanding officer's hand firmly. "Just a minor inconvenience. Protocol was followed to the letter." The distress beacon functioned exactly as engineered the second the lockbox was breached. "I see that," Riker said, his eyes drifting over to the shattered Chevelle hood where CID agents donning white forensic gloves were already meticulously gathering the scattered classified documents and slipping them into secure, opaque evidence bags. "I apologize for the delay. We had to scramble the Joint Task Force from Fort Liberty and the Charlotte Field Office. They broke land speed records getting down Highway 9. The timing was impeccable, Colonel." Across the parking lot, the sound of a grown man panicking shattered the night. Officer Garrett Shaw was pinned against the side of his own patrol car, his arms wrenched behind his back, while a stoic FBI agent secured heavy federal-issue handcuffs around his wrists. "You can't do this!" Shaw screamed, his face an ugly, mottled purple. Spit flew from his lips, catching the glare of the flashing strobe lights. "I am a decorated officer of the Oak Ridge Creek Police Department. I demand my union representative. I demand to speak to the chief of police. You feds have no jurisdiction on a local traffic stop." Special Agent Harlan Quill, the lead FBI agent on the scene, finished tightening the cuffs and stepped back, looking at Shaw with an expression of profound disgust. "Your local union representative isn't cleared for the federal crimes you just committed, Thomas," Quill said, his voice flat and devoid of any sympathy. "You are being detained under the Espionage Act for unauthorized access and mishandling of national defense information. You are also being charged with the destruction of federal government property, false imprisonment, and criminal deprivation of civil rights under color of law." "It was a mistake," Shaw wailed, the arrogant facade completely shattering. The realization of his doom was finally penetrating his thick skull. He wouldn't open the box. He was driving a suspiciously expensive car. He crossed the white line. I had probable cause. "We'll see about your probable cause." Harlan's deep voice resonated across the tarmac. Harlan walked over to the group, pulling his smartphone from his pocket. He synced it to the smartwatch, still strapped to his wrist, and played the audio file he had secretly recorded. The crisp, high-definition audio of the entire encounter echoed loudly in the quiet night. Every word, every fabricated lie about the smell of marijuana, every threatening demand Shaw had made was played back for the federal agents to hear. Shaw's face drained of blood, turning a sickly, translucent white. He looked at Harlan, his eyes wide with a terror he usually reserved for his victims. "Furthermore," Harlan said smoothly, tapping the screen of his phone, "my vehicle is equipped with a dual-facing 4K resolution dashcam with integrated audio. It is currently uploading the footage of this entire traffic stop to a secure cloud server. The footage will conclusively prove that I maintain my lane perfectly, drove under the speed limit, and committed 0 traffic infractions. The stop was entirely illegal, predicated on racial profiling and an abuse of authority." Shaw slumped against the cruiser, his legs threatening to give out. He turned his desperate eyes toward his young partner. Roe, tell them he was swerving. Tell them you smelled the weed too. You have to back me up, kid." Roe stood frozen, staring at his training officer. For weeks, Shaw had taught him that the badge was a shield against consequences, that the brotherhood of the uniform meant covering for each other no matter what. But looking at the array of heavily armed federal agents and the towering, calm presence of the Army Ranger he had helped illegally detain, Roe made the most important decision of his life. Roe reached up to his chest, unclipped his Axon body camera, and held it out to Agent Quill. "I didn't smell any marijuana, sir," Roe said, his voice shaking but clear. Major Vale was driving perfectly. Officer Shaw powered down his body camera before approaching the vehicle. He ordered me to retrieve the pry bar to break open the box, even after Major Vale warned him it was a federal container. I have it all on video. I'll testify to whatever you need." "You little rat!" Shaw shrieked, lunging awkwardly at Roe before Agent Quill shoved him hard against the car. "Good choice, son," Agent Quill said, taking the camera from Roe. He looked at another agent. "Put Shaw in the back of the transport. I don't want to hear his voice anymore." As Shaw was unceremoniously shoved into the back of the dark, unmarked Suburban, his cries echoing in the night, Colonel Riker turned back to Harlan. "What about the vehicle?" Riker asked, looking at the deep gouges in the classic Chevelle's paint. "That was your father's, wasn't it?" Harlan walked over to the car, running a hand gently over the damaged hood. "It was. It can be repaired, Colonel. Metal and paint can be fixed. Some things are more important. He looked toward the Suburban where Shaw was locked away. A predator with a badge has been taken off the streets. My father would consider that a fair trade for a paint job. The fallout from that evening in Oak Ridge Creek hit the small affluent town like a Category 5 hurricane. By the time the sun rose the next morning, Officer Garrett Shaw was sitting in a windowless federal interrogation room, stripped of his uniform and dressed in an orange jumpsuit. The United States Department of Justice did not view the breach of JSOC intelligence lightly. It wasn't just a matter of a rogue cop stepping over the line. It was treated as a severe national security incident. The investigation, spearheaded by the FBI and heavily supported by the Army's Criminal Investigation Division, didn't stop with Shaw. Agent Quill's team used the incident as a battering ram to audit the entire Oak Ridge Creek Police Department. They seized years of dashcam footage, body camera drives, and dispatch logs. What they uncovered was a systemic, deeply ingrained culture of racial profiling, asset forfeiture abuse, and constitutional violations. Garrett Shaw wasn't an anomaly. He was simply the most brazen product of a corrupt precinct. Several other officers, including the chief of police, were forced into early retirement or indicted on federal civil rights charges. Months later, the United States District Court was packed to absolute capacity. Major Harlan Vale, recently promoted, sat quietly in the front row of the gallery. He wore his immaculately pressed Army service uniform, his chest heavy with rows of ribbons, including a bronze star and a purple heart. He sat with the quiet, imposing stillness of a man entirely at peace with his surroundings. Garrett Shaw sat at the defense table. He was entirely unrecognizable from the arrogant, puffed-up bully who had swaggered up to the Chevelle. He had lost significant weight. His hair was thinning and unkempt, his complexion pale and sallow. The cheap, ill-fitting suit he wore hung off his frame like a wet paper bag. The trial had been a massacre. Shaw's defense attorney had tried to argue qualified immunity, claiming Shaw was acting in good faith. The federal prosecutor had simply played the high-definition audio from Harlan's smartwatch, coupled with the pristine dashcam footage and Rowe's devastating testimony. The jury had taken less than 2 hours to reach a verdict. "Will the defendant please rise?" the Honorable Judge Everett Lang ordered, his voice echoing through the cavernous courtroom. Shaw stood, his knees trembling so violently he had to grip the edge of the mahogany table just to stay upright. "Garrett Shaw," Judge Lang began, peering down through his reading glasses with cold disdain. "In my years on the federal bench, I have rarely seen such a flagrant, arrogant, and dangerous abuse of law enforcement authority. You were entrusted with a badge and a gun to protect the citizens of your community. Instead, you used them as tools of intimidation, preying on those you deemed vulnerable." The courtroom was completely silent. Shaw stared at his shoes, tears welling in his eyes. "You thought you were pulling over an easy target," the judge continued, his voice rising in volume. "A man you racially profiled and assumed you could bully into submission. Instead, you unlawfully detained a decorated military officer and violently compromised highly classified intelligence, vital to the security of the United States. Your actions were not born of a mistake. They were born of malice, prejudice, and a staggering sense of entitlement." The judge slammed a stack of papers down on his desk. "For the charges of violating the civil rights of Major Harlan Vale, false imprisonment, destruction of federal property, and felony mishandling of classified intelligence, I sentence you to 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary to be served without the possibility of parole. Furthermore, you are forever stripped of your law enforcement credentials. Your pension is hereby revoked, and you will pay restitution for the damages caused to Major Vale's property." The gavel slammed down with the finality of a coffin lid closing. Bang! Shaw collapsed back into his chair, burying his face in his hands as loud, racking sobs tore through his chest. The U.S. Marshals immediately stepped forward, grabbing him by the arms, hauling him to his feet and dragging him toward the holding cells. As Shaw was led past the gallery, he looked up through his tears and locked eyes with Harlan. Harlan didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He merely looked at the broken man with the cold, unyielding stare of a soldier who had neutralized a threat. Shaw broke the eye contact first, dropping his head in absolute shame as the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom swallowed him whole. Outside the courthouse, the bright North Carolina sun was shining. Harlan walked down the marble steps, adjusting his service cap. Waiting for him at the curb, gleaming like a polished sapphire in the midday sun, was the 1969 Chevrolet Chevelle SS. The hood had been completely replaced and color-matched by one of the finest classic car restorers in the country. The bill was fully covered by the town of Oak Ridge Creek as part of a massive 7-figure civil settlement. Standing by the driver's side door was former rookie Elias Rowe. He was no longer wearing a police uniform. He had resigned from the force shortly after the incident, realizing that the culture of local policing in that town was irreparably broken. He was now wearing a crisp suit, working as an investigator for the county's public defender's office. "Car looks beautiful, Major," Rowe said, offering a genuine, if slightly nervous, smile. "Thanks, Rowe," Harlan replied, returning the smile warmly. "And thank you for what you did in there. It took courage to stand up to him." "It was the right thing to do," Rowe said softly. "You taught me more about honor in those minutes at a gas station than Shaw taught me in several months on the job." Harlan nodded, shaking the young man's hand. He opened the heavy steel door of the Chevelle, slid into the luxurious leather bucket seat, and turned the key. The big block V8 roared to life, a deep, triumphant symphony of American muscle. Harlan put the car in gear and pulled out onto the street, the wind catching in the open window. He drove past the city limits, heading back toward the base, back toward his duty. The road ahead was clear, the shadows were gone, and for the first time in a long time, the drive felt completely, perfectly free. Power, without accountability, is a poison that corrupts the soul. Officer Garrett Shaw believed his badge made him untouchable, using it as a weapon against those he felt were beneath him. But the universe has a profound way of delivering justice when bullies cross the wrong line. Major Harlan Vale proved that true strength isn't found in shouting or intimidation, but in absolute calm discipline. Shaw's arrogance cost him his freedom, his career, and his legacy, while Harlan drove away with his dignity and his father's beautiful car intact. If you love this story of instant karma and ultimate justice, please like this video. Share it with your friends to spread the message, and hit that subscribe button for more incredible real-life stories. Leave a comment below on what you would have done in Harlan's shoes.